Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Black Adam. Let's talk about it. So Black Adam is the latest addition to the DC franchise, or the DCEU, whatever they're calling it these days. And I have to admit right up top that I wasn't particularly interested in this film. Like 48 hours ago, I did not care about Black Adam whatsoever. To me, Black Adam was a superhero movie that was standing in the way between myself and Black Panther. Okay, that's the only black that I wanted to hear about for the next few weeks. Okay, I was only interested in Black Panther, so I'm just patiently waiting for the release of that film. But honestly, after having seen the film itself, I think my attitude was a little bit unfair because I ended up having a pretty good time with it. So we're going to dive into my thoughts on the movie, as well as I think a little bit on the superhero landscape in general. I think that's something that we're going to touch on at the end of the review. But before we get into all of that good stuff, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at itsojeen. Now, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on Black Adam. So Black Adam is directed by Jaume Collet-Serra. I did in fact try that many times. I actually had to look up the pronunciation of his name because I wanted to get it right, but he is a Spanish director, and typically his filmography surrounds the horror genre. He's directed The Orphan and The Shallows, so he's a very well-known horror director, and this kind of follows the tradition of DC hiring some horror directors to direct some of their properties, like for instance James Wan with Aquaman and David F. Sandberg for Shazam. So it makes sense that we have another horror director here taking on another DC hero. Although I will say, out of the three examples that we have here, Black Adam is definitely the least horror inspired in comparison to Aquaman and Shazam, which both have more horror elements to them, making use of the talents and skills of their respective directors. And now let's get into the plot of the movie, and this film centers on the character of Teth Adam, of course portrayed by Dwayne Johnson. And here we have a character who comes from an ancient civilization that is very much akin to ancient Egypt, except it's even older than ancient Egypt, I guess they're alleging. But he was born around 5,000 years ago, and he was actually a slave under the king of the time, who was seeking this special mineral that would grant him supernatural, devilish Lucifer power. Literally like the wildest powers. He wanted to create this crown because there was an ancient myth about a crown, so he decided to enslave his people, like as you do, and they were forced to mine their land and seek out this mineral so that he could create the crown to then get these demonic powers. You know, this is comic book movie logic, like what can I say? As you can imagine, a lot of people were quite discontent with these circumstances. Like a lot of people were really upset about the whole slavery thing, and one of those people ended up being Teth Adam's son, who actually dared to speak out. You know, he dared to get everybody to kind of fight against this horrible oppressive system, and he was really wishing for a hero that would save their land, their country. But then his wish actually came true when Kandak was granted with a hero who could save them from their oppressive king by the wizards, who we saw a little bit of from Shazam. And later in the film we find out that it was actually Teth Adam's son who was the hero that was granted with these powers. It wasn't him himself. He only got these powers when his son gave them to him to save his life after his family home had been ransacked and after his mother had been killed in front of his father, who hadn't been able to protect her. And in giving away his powers to his father, he himself ended up dying. We see throughout the film film that there are bits of Teth Adam's story being revealed in these flashbacks, and then in the end we get a full understanding of his character's origins and why it is that he doesn't accept the title of hero readily, and it's because he sees his son as being the true hero of Kandak, and he sees himself as unworthy of the title, especially because of the revenge that he sought after his son died right in front of him. Now, I have to say, as far as origin stories go, I think this is a decent one. I really do. Like, I like the fact that they incorporated the flashbacks throughout the film, so we got to unravel this mystery as we went along. Oftentimes we see like one flashback at the beginning of a film or a TV series, and then you don't really get more of an expansion of that origin story, She-Hulk. So I like the fact that they didn't just forget about his origin, and it was actually very much embedded in his character arc and character development in the film. It was very crucial to the character. Having said that though, if I did have one problem or one qualm with this origin story, I would say that it was a little bit of a cop-out. Now, I'm not too familiar, as I often say, with the comics, you know, the Black Adam comics here, but I am aware that he's supposed to be more of an antagonist in the DC comics. So I was quite surprised to see that in this film, whilst everyone is always talking about how he should be the hero and he's always denying that he's the hero, we find out, of course, that it's because of what he did after his son died and all of that. But that whole kind of conflict with the character is kind of weakened by the fact that the worst thing that he did was try and avenge his son. Like, that's a bit of a cop-out. That's a bit of a cop-out, right? And I do think that this is a result of the character being portrayed by Dwayne Johnson, and I'm sure that it's not really in his prerogative to want to be seen as an out-and-out villain, even if this is a character who does eventually change and shift and become somewhat of an anti-hero. So there was a bit of a cop-out here with this kind of origin story saying that he just wanted to avenge his son. He got really angry, but it's because his beautiful wife and adorable son were killed, so of course he was angry. It's like, I swear in the comics he like sacrifices his son or something. It's a bit more controversial and daring in the comics from what I've heard, whereas here in the film it's all about trying to portray Teth Adam as a reluctant hero. He may not accept the title of hero in the film, on the script, okay, on the piece of paper, but from what they're showing us, he is clearly a good guy. Now, like I said, Teth Adam's origin story is kind of sprinkled in throughout the film, but after the first kind of expositional opening scene, we do jump forward 5,000 years into the present day, and here we're introduced to the university professor Adrianna, who is a specialist in her country's history and culture and mythology, and she is looking for the crown. Remember that crown that we were talking about before? That demonic crown? Yeah, she's looking for it along with a ragtag group of dodgy, questionable people and her brother and her brother as well. So they go seeking out the crown in order to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, namely in the hands of the Intergang. Now, the Intergang is this organization of, I guess, mercenaries that must be puppeteered by some kind of government or multinational corporation. Unfortunately, we see that even in the modern day, this country is still being oppressed, but this time, instead of their own king oppressing them, it's now Intergang, this group of mercenaries who are oppressing the people, you know, kind of governing the country under martial law. And this isn't happening for the good of the people. Please, of course not. When is it ever, okay? This is all happening because some multinational corporation behind the scenes want to protect its investment in this land due to the presence of precious raw materials and natural resources there, namely the fictional Eternium, which is that precious natural resource that the king wanted to mine out of the land thousands of years ago in order to create his crown. It has some kind of magical abilities that, like I said, give you demonic powers. So yeah, to this day, this Eternium is still being being drilled out from the ground and is still incredibly valuable to this country's oppressors. I have to say, I really enjoyed this element of the story, or not really enjoyed it, but I found it very compelling. I was very invested in this element of the story. The idea that this film would explore what it means to live in a country that has these natural resources that are sought after by multinational corporations, making billions upon billions of dollars of profit off of these resources, I just feel like was so fascinating, and I really appreciated the addition of this storyline. As someone who comes from Congo, the DRC, some of you guys may know that Congo is actually the wealthiest country in the world when it comes to natural resources. And that's not me saying that because I'm Congolese and I want to be biased. No. Look that shit up. Look that shit up. Congo has a ton of natural resources: oil, diamonds, gold, coltan, everything. And unfortunately, it has led to the country being run amok because chaos breeds profit. So this storyline being incorporated into this superhero movie was actually very compelling to me, and I felt like we could have even pushed it further. We could have really explored the geopolitics of this fictional country even further with even more depth and complexity, but unfortunately it wasn't that kind of film, so it was very surface level. But as someone who comes from a country that has this sort of issue on the daily, I appreciated its inclusion nonetheless. And I will also add that, of course, I don't think it was accidental that a lot of the intergang soldiers that we saw on the streets were British. They were British, okay? Some of them sounded Australian, but I'm pretty sure they were supposed to be British. I did see a pair of horrific teeth in one of the slow-mo scenes. Oh my god, we'll talk about the slow-mo later. I do think that is a nod to the history of British occupation of Middle Eastern countries, in particular like Egypt, which I think that Kandak is kind of an equivalent to, the DC equivalent to. So I think it makes sense that you have the inclusion of those characters in this film, because it's definitely a commentary on British imperialism. Going back to the plot itself, we have this ragtag team going out to seek the crown so it doesn't land in the wrong hands, only for there to be a snafu. Okay, some mercenaries are already there, ready and waiting. And it's made worse because one of the guys in the gang turned out to be a double crosser. Okay, this guy Ishmael was actually working for the other side, and he was trying to get his hands on the crown himself, and unbeknownst to Adrianna, if he had gotten his hands on that crown, she would have been dead. Like, sis would have been dead. But she manages to escape with her brother, but not before calling for the help of Mr. Teth Adam himself, awakening him from what she thought was his tomb, but in actuality was his prison, which again was a very cool twist near the end there. But that's how he's awakened. That's how he's brought into the present day. I think it was a decent setup. It gave me Moon Knight vibes, but that's not this film's fault. This film was filmed ages ago. But yeah, it definitely gave me Moon Knight flashbacks. But like I said, a really decent setup for the film that ties into real world geopolitics, but also the mythology of this character, and is a great introduction for Teth Adam at the beginning of the film. But then things go wrong. But then things kind of just fall off of a cliff for me. Like I said, I had a fun time with this film, but this is where we get into the issues that I had with this plot and with its depiction of the hero. I just think that overall, Dwayne Johnson and the crew, Dwayne Johnson and co, were just way too obsessed with re-establishing the hierarchy of DC, or whatever it is that he said. They were way too obsessed with that, and so their topmost priority, their highest priority from what I could see in this film, was to make Black Adam look like the strongest, fastest, most powerful DC hero to have ever been put on the big screen. I feel like that was the priority here. I feel like that is all that they wanted to accomplish, was to have Black Adam just look so mind-blowingly cool. He's blowing up everything. He's taking these guys down like it's nothing. Unfortunately, I don't think that they thought long enough about the consequences of that to the story. Like the fact that the villains just have no weight because they're being flung around like dolls every time they have a physical confrontation. Another consequence is, you know, if you start off a film with a bombastic action sequence that feels like it should be the final act of the movie, where are you gonna go from there? You're gonna have to try and top yourself each and every time throughout these entire 3 acts. And so by the end of this film, it just feels like you've watched something so messy and so loud, and just this constant array of CG action sequences, you know, with laser beams and lightning and fire just thrown about all over the place. And in the end, it just doesn't mean anything. You feel nothing. You feel nothing. It doesn't garner any emotion. It's just like a messy, loud spectacle. Just a shame that from then on in, it became this like loud, messy, ugly display of hyper violence, the likes of which we haven't seen since Man of Steel. Dare I say, Man of Steel. And again, it's all because Dwayne Johnson wanted to re-establish or, you know, reorder the hierarchy of DC. He clearly wanted to prove that Black Adam is on the level of Superman, because that's ultimately who he wants Black Adam to fight. And so he's gone and made the same mistakes that Zack Snyder did in Man of Steel, especially in the 3rd act, where there was just like a clattering of violence. It was senseless and it didn't leave you feeling emotional or in suspense. It was just madness and chaos for the sake of madness and chaos. I have to say though, in the case of Black Adam, it's even worse than Man of Steel, because he's supposed to be the hero of Kandak. He's supposed to be their protector, and even though he doesn't readily accept that title, the fact that he's going around literally destroying the city, like literally destroying the city wherever he goes, leaving behind just carnage and rubble, you know, in his wake, I feel like that's not really the behavior of a savior or a potential hero. It's not giving hero, it's giving villain. Okay, it's giving problem, not solution. Speaking of The Rock as Teth Adam, aka Black Adam, I enjoyed his portrayal of this character. It was very straight-laced, you know, he was giving Drax vibes, not really understanding the humor of the present day, but I feel like he bounced off of other characters really well. I mean, The Rock's been doing this kind of thing for a long time, and my biggest fear was that I wouldn't be able to see Black Adam in his performance, that I would just see another The Rock character. And even though that's kind of what happened, I would have to say that because his version of Black Adam has been written so well for him, it's not as jarring, you know, it's not as much of a problem. Like if, I don't know, The Rock tried to do Tony Stark or something, then it would be a problem. Then it would be a huge issue. Or if he tried to be like Captain America. Because of the way that the character is written, he's not being asked to do any acting gymnastics, so the character itself kind of fits in with his persona. Just aesthetically, I mean, if you are going to have a new DC hero that reorganizes the hierarchy of DC or whatever, it does make sense to have a guy that looks like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Makes sense to have a guy that literally looks like he could kill you with a stare. Like, although speaking of the aesthetics, I have to say I really hated the Black Adam suit, and I'm not much of a fan of the Shazam suit either. I don't like the lightning bolts thing that they have on their chests. It's just like corny and uncool. As I've said many times before, not everything on the comic book page is going to translate well on the big screen, at least not in my opinion. And I actually felt like Black Adam looked his best when he had the hood on. That hood look was sick. The fact that it was all tattered and ripped when he came out of the cave and he was fighting against the Intergang guys, I feel like that was his best look. And then when he took it off, I was like, oh, yeah, it's a bit of a shame. Also, apparently in the comics, he's supposed to have pointy ears. Nope. Do not need that. Do not need that. Some people were upset that he didn't have pointy ears. I do not care. Nope. We don't need a whole discussion about why he has pointy ears. We don't need that. Nope. Absolutely not. So now let's get into some of the other characters. And first lot up are the Justice Society. I love this gang. I really did. Like, I really enjoyed the Justice Society, and honestly, it's 90% because of Dr. Fate. Yep. Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate. Oh, in an alternate reality, DC would have its head together, okay, would have its shit together, and there would have been a Justice Society movie with these characters, you know, being fully explored, the team dynamics being cemented before they showed up in this Black Adam movie. In this alternate reality that's in my head, that's what would have happened, and that's what would have made more sense. But unfortunately, we're also introduced to these characters for the very first time, and so we see the writers flailing, we see the writers, you know, haphazardly trying to string together a backstory for these characters, as well as trying to establish the team dynamics here, even though they know full well that the storyline surrounding the Justice Society is like a C or D storyline, and they won't have enough time to do it any justice. But as it stands, I really enjoyed each and every one of them. Like I said, Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate, mwah. Perfect. What excellent casting. He really knocked it out of the park. I'm so gutted that there wasn't a solo Justice Society movie, but he was just really perfect casting. I really enjoyed the character, and for the first time in for the first time ever, I actually wish that it would be a possibility in the near future to have a DC versus Marvel movie, because I think Pierce Brosnan's Dr. Fate going up against someone like Doctor Strange would actually be a riot. Like, it would actually be so cool, even though Doctor Strange is like infinitely more powerful. But if they like messed around with Dr. Fate's power set, I think that would be a really good combo. So I really enjoyed Dr. Fate. I was heartbroken that he died, but I'm hoping that we can ignore that. I'm hoping that in the future, if they decided to bring him back, we could just like finesse the details and completely ignore that stupid plot point where he died, because that's a huge mistake. And then we have Aldous Hodge, who portrays a new version of Hawkman. I also really enjoyed this character. He didn't quite have the same like zaniness and charisma as Pierce Brosnan's character, because he wasn't that kind of character. He was a bit more straight-laced and serious and about the mission, and there's a little less flexibility there to play around. But I do think that Aldous Hodge was very charismatic. I did think it was unfortunate that the writers and, you know, the director here really tried to make him a Black Panther-esque character. Did they not think I would notice? Like, we noticed, okay? We noticed with his wealth. We noticed with his ship, for sure. Like, even in the trailers, when I saw the trailers, I was like, that's giving Black Panther energy. And to be honest, the whole film feels like an amalgamation of different previous superhero movies like Black Panther. I also got a bit of Age of Ultron, and like I said, Man of Steel, with the destruction and the city being ruined. And like I said, I was definitely getting Doctor Strange vibes from Dr. Fate, especially with the way that they manifested his powers with those geometric shapes. So the film did feel quite derivative in that way, and unfortunately Hawkman was a victim of that, because he doesn't really stand out as a character on his own, and it doesn't help that there are constant comparisons to him and his whole deal with T'Challa. I was also a fan of Cyclone and Atom Smasher, although of course in the case of Atom Smasher, we've already been there, we've already done that with Scott Lang and his giant man situation. So, you know, it would have been more shocking and a bit more exciting if we hadn't had that before in the MCU. But I still think that their version of Giant Man was really cool. It was realized really well. I like the fact that they added that kind of rubbery texture to the suit. I also really like the mask itself. A lot of the characters in this whole lineup had masks, which I think the CGI team must have been really relieved about, because they didn't have to animate any faces. But in the case of Atom Man, I think his mask is quite striking. It was giving like Watchmen vibes with the white eyes. I feel like it was a very striking look for him. A bit more sinister than the character himself underneath the mask, but still, like, I approve. I feel like it was a very cool look. And in the case of Cyclone, I think she is the only character that has a very unique look and power set, at least from what we've seen so far in live action from the MCU and DCEU. So yeah, that was great. Like, seeing these characters kind of fighting together as a team was really cool. And like I said, my main complaint was that we didn't have a lot of time with them and we didn't get to explore a lot of their team dynamics because unfortunately they didn't have their own solo movie. And then the next pair I wanted to talk about very quickly was Adrianna and Amon, her son. Now, I enjoyed these two. I think Amon was very adorable, very charismatic. He did the thing. But I didn't realize that they would be in the film so much. I have to say, I did feel like they overstayed their welcome. I think it was a little bit limiting to have Black Adam's main raison d'etre to be saving Amon from the bad guys, pretty much. Like, it felt like he was doing a lot of chasing after Amon, who skated around the entire country all freely in this very dangerous environment. But yeah, like, I feel like that was a bit short-sighted. We could have had another reason for Black Adam to prove himself as a hero, as opposed to just being, you know, slightly affectionate towards this child that kind of reminds him of his son, who he failed to protect 5,000 years ago, right? So I think that could have been cute for like one scene, but to have several different action sequences focused on saving Amon, who ends up constantly in danger, the ultimate damsel in distress, I think was a little bit limiting. And then finally, we need to talk about the villain of this film. The villain of this film is Lucifer. The villain of this the villain of this film is the devil himself. Guys, I can't make this stuff up. I can't make this stuff up. I can't believe that they animated a demonic character and was like, right, Black Adam, go fight against that. Like, what? I don't know how this character looks like in the comics, if he's even in the comics, but that's wild to me. Like, that's the actual devil that he's fighting against. And you know what's really wild? On top of the fact that they had Lucifer as the villain of this film, of course, that's already quite wild. But on top of that, you have this whole sequence where Ishmael, who turns out to be the bad guy, he's the descendant of the Mad King, right? He changes into this demonic character after going into the Upside Down. The literal upside down. Talk about derivative. The literal upside down. He goes there. The reverse version of the like Wizards Council ends up giving him these powers after he assembles the crown, and then he becomes this like demonic Lucifer creature that is very reminiscent to me of Jafar in Aladdin turning into the red version of the genie. Like, when he turns into the red genie in Aladdin, both the live action and the animated version, it was giving that vibe as well. Like, we're talking about a whole bunch of films that this movie takes inspiration from. But get this, right? The whole time I was thinking, as I was watching the film, I've seen this guy Ishmael before. This guy Ishmael looks real familiar to me. Where have I seen him before? He is Jafar. He is Jafar in the live action Aladdin. Oh my goodness. It all came full circle, guys. I can't make this shit up. It's just incredible to me. So yeah, choices were made. Okay, choices were made the second that they hired Marwan Kenzani to portray Ishmael, the villain of this story, because the fact that we have that direct link to the Jafar of it all is just hilarious. Now I can never unsee it, and I'm sure you can't either. Before we get into my overall thoughts on this movie as well as its place in the superhero landscape, I did just want to jump in here and say that technically speaking, I was really impressed with the film overall. It is very CG heavy, as many of these, you know, superhero movies are. I do feel like the CG in the first half of the film was much better than the second half, especially that final act with the fight sequence against Lucifer, against the actual devil. I feel like the devil looked like a video game character. He did not look tangible or real at all, so he was poorly animated on that front. But otherwise, I did feel like the scale was suitably big and cinematic. It felt like it belonged on a big screen, and it definitely felt like the kind of spectacle that a lot of people like to see in cinemas instead of just watching it at home on Netflix or Disney Plus. So that's a plus, I guess. And also, I have to say, I was a really big fan of the music in this film, particularly the score itself was very, very memorable, especially when you got to the like credits. I feel like it just had that very distinctiveness to it. Even as I'm talking, it's like running through my head. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see that the score was done by Lorne Balfe, who also did the score for Mission Impossible Fallout. And I actually downloaded a few of the songs from that movie because I really enjoyed his take on the Mission Impossible iconic music then as well. So bravo to all those involved. And finally, let's get into my thoughts on Black Adam in the superhero landscape overall. Now, I have to say that whilst I had a decent time watching this film, I don't regret going to see it. I don't think it did anything to really push this genre forward, especially considering that we're now in 2022 and the genre of superhero movies and, you know, comic book movie adaptations is oversaturated, like truly so oversaturated, right? So I feel like at this point in time, more than any other time in the last 20 years, these films really need to do something to just add something extra and unique and special and groundbreaking to the superhero genre in order to stand out. Otherwise, they're just going to end up being forgotten about in a pile of mediocrity. Unfortunately, I do feel like that Black Adam is a film that would land in that pile. Despite the fact that I enjoyed it, I don't think it was anything particularly special or remarkable. And to make matters worse, not only does this film not do anything particularly new, but it feels very derivative. As I said, like, you can see where it's gotten its inspirations from. There's very few things here that are unique to this film. It feels like a hodgepodge of, you know, different elements from better films that have all been combined to make this one. Funnily enough, in a lot of ways, Black Adam reminds me of the Black Widow movie from last year, in that they both feel like they're films that belong in a bygone era of the superhero genre. It feels like these films would have fit in better in the like 2016 to 2018 era of superhero movies. And unfortunately, I have to say that the end credits sequence in Black Adam doesn't really help with that. Yes, it is shocking to see Henry Cavill return for the end credits in this film, but again, we've done this before. We've done this before. I feel like we need to be moving on to better things instead of kind of recycling and rehashing what the DCEU has been doing for the last 10 years, especially because a lot of that has just been not as successful as it could have been. So unfortunately, whilst the end credits scene was fun for the moment, all it ended up doing was reminding me of the DCEU past as opposed to getting me excited about its future. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Black Adam a 6.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Black Adam, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!